approval of the winter fuel allowance, the beginning of austerity 2.0?
Well, first, I think it's very important to talk about, kind of good debt and bad debt. And if this is being done simply to reduce the so-called 20 billion hole that the Labour government inherited, we need to realize that a lot of that hole was actually due to a lot of incompetence, for example, around tax. It wasn't because too much was being spent on all the things that we need, like infrastructure, whether it's our housing infrastructure, transport infrastructure, health infrastructure. So simply coming in and then saying we need to cut in order to reduce that hole, my view is that potentially that hole only becomes bigger. Why? Because the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action. In other words, if you're actually cutting areas like the winter fuel tax, that then perhaps even makes the people who are not receiving their winter fuel, and there's lots of pensioners who will not, and they then get sick and they end up in hospital, there's a cost there. And so any sort of modeling and analysis of whether this was the right thing to do to save, what was it, 1.3 or 1.6 billion has to be taking a long run view. And by the way, this is always true, right? Anytime we make a cut, it looks like it's a cut and it looks like there might be a saving, but in so many different instances, we see that actually that ends up costing the economy much more because of what it actually does, again, to the kind of social fabric, to the health and well-being of people. It costs less, to educate a child than to put them in prison. So there's all sorts of different ways.
You've got to find the money up front to do that. And where are you?
Well, no, because governments aren't households, right? I mean, as a person, you would have to do that, but governments always create money. The question is, are you just creating money?
By borrowing or raising taxes?
Of course. Well, you could do both, but the point is, you don't just want helicopter money and spending for spending's sake. If you're actually spending in anything that kind of expands the productive capacity of the economy, but also health and well-being of people, ultimately, that will also increase productivity, it will increase growth. That's the denominator, by the way, of debt to GDP, right? GDP, which is the denominator, is fueled by the types of investments that we make, which include health and well-being of people, which we should make anyway. It shouldn't be an economic, if you want, calculation. We should care about humanity and especially the most vulnerable people. And apparently there will be many vulnerable pensioners who will not be getting their winter fuel payment. But that issue of always comparing the short-run saving, actually plotting out the cost that will actually have, both in terms of the human tragedy, so people will be cold, but even just on economic grounds. One of them is a health mission. One is an opportunity mission. One is a mission about health and well-being of young people, because it's about keeping our streets safe, but that's not just about policing, right? So I think that's where the focus should be. And given that we do have the opportunity mission and the health mission, and I think these are really important, making sure that that initial cut is not only potentially a problematic narrative, right? You start and immediately you are potentially, if you want, doing something that can be interpreted as austerity, but also making things worse for people, right? Why not really focus on those investments that are needed, which ultimately will also be good for the public finances?
Yeah.